Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 694th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Vanessa German and Amber Jamilla Musser. We're thrilled to welcome poet Yaz Lancaster here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but are a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. Artist Vanessa German works across sculpture, performance, communal rituals, installation, and photography. Considered inextricable from the artist's identity as an activist, German's autodidactic art making has its lineage in indigenous and West African folk practices, as well as Black arts movements from the 1960s onwards to propose new models for social healing, utilizing creativity and tenderness as forces to reckon with the historical and ongoing catastrophes of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and misogynoir. As German reappropriates, re-conceptualizes, and resiliently transforms both materials and the symbolic weight of images, German occasions a transfiguration analogous to healing. And our host today is Dr. Amber Jamilla Musser. Amber is a professor of English at the CUNY Graduate Center. She writes about race, sexuality, and aesthetics. She's the author of Sensational Flesh, Race, Power, and Masochism, and Sensual Excess, Queer Femininity, and Brown Jouissance. She has a master's in women's studies from Oxford University and a PhD in the history of science from Harvard, and has held fellowships at New York University's Draper Program in Gender Studies and Brown University's Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women. She writes about art criticism for us at the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Amber.
Hello, everybody. It's so lovely to see so many excited faces for Friday conversation. I am thrilled to be here in conversation with Vanessa. This is a very, very special show. And before we start talking about it, we're going to give you a little slideshow of the rarest Black woman on the planet Earth, touched and is touched. Well, I guess that's a subtitle. The rarest Black woman on the planet Earth, which is currently on view at Mount Holyoke. So we can proceed through the slides. So, okay, I'm going to start talking, but we're still going to keep the slides going just because I feel like it's going to get awkward for me just staring. So Vanessa, just as we're going through these slides, I'm wondering if you could tell us give us a little bit of background as to this project, just for everyone to sort of hold in their brain as they're kind of looking through the images. And Vanessa, you're muted right now.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Rarest Black Woman on the Planet Earth began, Mount Holyoke reached out to two artists to engage with the Skinner Collection for the 75th anniversary of the Skinner Collection, which is, I don't know, how would you talk about the Skinner Collection? It was a wealthy business owner's sort of adventure into the world and gather the world and sort of amass a collection to hold the world in a place. Like, so Skinner was collecting anything and everything and gave this collection to Mount Holyoke, and which the collection consists of, you know, thousands and thousands of objects and several buildings also. And what happened for me in the process was that you know, it was a really challenging thing to engage with this collection in a way for me that was soulful and meaningful, that was a way that I'm asking of the process of my life and of any creative process that I'm inside of to do something, to be selfish. I'm asking for the process to do something for me and to be meaningful and impactful and purposeful and soulful in the world now, in the world that we live in. And so the Rarest Black Woman on the Planet Earth began with me thinking, how do I, you know, we were talking about decolonization. The curators mentioned this word to me, decolonization. I'm like, how do we do that? Like, how do you actually decolonize anything when what has happened has happened? How do we clear what has happened? How do we make, you know, clear the canvas and paint a new story forward? And I was like, how do we change and shift the story of the Skinner Museum? And one of the things that came to me is that I could own the collection. It could move from being the Skinner collection to being a collection that is actually about how important I am as a fat Black queer woman in the United States. I'm like, so how do we do this? And one of the things that I pitched was for me to get permission to touch every single object in the collection. And by touching every single object in the collection, I would, in a sense, own the collection, like thinking of the way that we talk about owning in the like Urban Dictionary, like, oh, you owned it, like you dunked on them hard, like you are, you know, so rare, so special, you could just like call it yours, you know? And so in touching every single object in the collection, I actually had a profound experience of touching every object. But from that point forward, I really wanted to engage in this idea of emancipatory practice and allowing the moment of awakening and heart opening and the moment of like trembling in the face of the power of my own humanity to not just belong to me, to not just be something that I held in my heart and in my knowing as a human being. I wanted it to be something that expanded to the community beyond. So from the touching portion, which has its own intricacies, I worked with two students, Courtney and Dominica, to create questions of engagement and awakening and transformation, transmutation, transcendence for the entire Mount Holyoke community, which are the cards that some of that information came back to us in the cards that you see now. So people wrote about their hearts. They wrote about lies that they had been told when they were children and how those lies impacted them. And people wrote about things that could become ingredients to their own emancipated experience. And they also gave forth objects. They gave forth, you know, there were collection bins. So people put forth shoes and jewelry and hats and gloves and coats and so a lot of the material that the actual objects and sculptures are made out of, probably 75% of that was given to me by the Mount Holyoke community. I then went through every note card, every index card, and I touched every single object that was given to me by the Mount Holyoke community. I read every single card. And from that touching and given the things that people were sometimes people were telling secrets and things that were weighing them and keeping them in a shape of thought about their own selves that they would like to be released from. Then I made a series of power figures that were power figures to be actively in the purpose of transformation that the community, individuals in the community said that they needed to be free and to experience wholeness in their own humanity. So we went from the rarest Black woman touching every single object in the collection to the rarest Black woman on the planet Earth touched and is touched and creates an entire museum of emancipatory objects. So the process, it was so layered, and it was quite something that called up a kind of muscle of heart and a kind of muscle of soul to bring forward into the world.
Yeah, that's an amazing, thank you for sharing all of that, those layers of process. I mean, I think one of the things that for me really emerges about this project, and you, in one of the longer elaborations on it, you talk more extensively about decolonizing a thing, a museum, sort of, more sort of just like what exactly is decolonization. Yeah. But I think one of the things that I'm really struck by what this is doing is really decoupling this sort of the subject-object binary that so many museum experiences rely on in lots of different ways, right? So one of them, I think, is through kind of like these performative solicitations, right? Like even like that wall of mirrors that we see along the back, right, is asking for a particular type of engagement, asking people to bring in note cards. Well, and I think, thank you for going back to the mirrors. The mirrors are interesting because it's not just a reflection, it's like a reflection by which someone will be changed, because there are the slogans there as well.
It's an invitation.
Yeah, so there's that, and then the objects, and then the objects that people brought in that then became other objects themselves, right? So there's this sort of persistent disturbance of that kind of static idea that there's sort of like things to be looked at and collected and amassed, right? And then things that are sort of more engaged with and part of the work of living.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess I'm sort of, I'm interested in how we've talked a little bit about this on the pre-call, how the idea of rare itself gets transformed through this, because in that sort of like, movement away from objectification, rareness itself as a quantity, as an idea, also becomes more complicated.
It is because, so if we look at the shot that's on the screen right now of all those cases, they're glass cases that lock, that are holding extremely rare objects, right? And you think they're rare, you want to protect them from touch, you want to protect them from being stolen. There's lots of reasons why these objects are in these cases. And there was a time that this didn't exist, right? There was the time before the museum. There was a time when we, as human beings, what we honored as sacred and rare was invisible. It wasn't something that you could even touch. It was something that you were. It was something that you lived. It was something that was activated through relationship, through human relationship, through relationship in nature. And so this, one of the things that is sort of painful for me about even the title, The Rarest Black Woman on the Planet Earth, is like the history of ownership, right? That like, I think about how when I visited Monticello, I found out that Thomas Jefferson owned the ovaries of the women he enslaved. So he owned so much future Blackness, like future Black humanness, and it made him incredibly wealthy. But there is the way that this is harder to talk about than I thought it would be, to be honest with you, because it's so layered and it's also personal. But there's a way that I thought that I was creating a space of radiance by naming myself the rarest Black woman on the planet Earth. And then in having discussions about that and identifying other Black, bodies that looked like mine and what became of them in their rareness and whose gaze and whose perspective deemed the rare rare. And that came with, and what that came with, right? And I think about it now. I think about the title, The Rarest Black Woman on the Planet Earth, in a completely different way than I did 11 months ago. Will you answer that question also that you just asked me about that? Where?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, a lot of what I was thinking about was the idea of like, we think about specimens as so rare.
Absolutely, right.
Sort of, they're securitized, we look at them. But then there's also just such violence that comes along with that. So in an accompanying video to this, this series, this project, you name check Sarah Bartman, who is the famous Hottentot woman in the 18th century who would traveled around and displayed as a specimen of African physique. And it's, just sort of, and then later on, her corpse was like held in a Paris museum because it was sort of, deemed rare. So just, I was thinking a lot about how this idea of rarity and scarcity is also a product of violence too. And that it's sort of like, you can't really extract the two from each other. And
there's a video called it's a music video, The Rarest Black Woman on Planet Earth. And it's a music video / film that takes viewers through the experience of touching, sort of a moment of awakening and transformation through the experience of touching the objects. And I talk about Sarah Bartman, and I was in South Africa the year that her body was returned to South Africa. And to be honest, like, I found a partial sculpture of her in the streets of, I think I might've been in Cape Town, by a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Cape Town. I found a partial Hottentot Venus sculpture, and my South African friends were like, those are everywhere. Like, they just returned her. And I remember being seized by her story and the shape of her body, and actually talking to a physician's assistant who explained to me why her body had the shape that it had. It was actually a condition. And she said, this is what is happening here for this type of body form. And so when I thought about turning myself into a specimen in this process, but in my lived experience, how I have so desperately in my lifetime, as like this fat, Black, weird, queer kid, done so much to specialize myself, because it would give me safety, or it would give me opportunity, or it would place me in a position to actually be seen, when there were so many times and places in my life where I was underseen, not seen, or monsterized in my seeing, right? And so I reflect upon the rarest Black woman on the planet Earth, and how one of the incredible weight that it is to live a life in the desperation, in this like desperate attempt to perform just the radiance of your humanity, to perform and present to an angry world that has narrowed eyes, an angry world that is often so anti-Black, to perform your radiance, the radiance of your humanity, and how exhausting that is and can be. But I also think about these objects in the cases, and how they do have, the individual objects and specimens have their own one of the things I experienced was that they had their own radiance. And there's a way that the shape that they're in is a lie to the radiance of the object and the life of the object. I'm just going to clear this up right now on the screen. This work is called Skinner and the Washerwoman in the Garden of Eden. So you have this McCoy piece of pottery. It's actually a cookie jar of a washerwoman that I have added a cluster of Lemurian quartz crystal. So if anybody knows about Lemurian crystal, that quartz is there for a reason, but underneath it is the actual Skinner paperweight from the Skinner Silk Company that Joseph Skinner's family owned. So there's a typo in this. It's not Inner and the Washerwoman, it's Skinner and the Washerwoman in the Garden of Eden.
For those of us who don't know what the significance of this quartz is, do you want to?
So Lemurian quartz is considered record-keeping quartz. That it's quartz that is actually holding the information. I'm going to generalize this. That is the record of the earth.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that sort of. I'm curious in shifting away from like the specimens, right? One of the things.
Wait, really quickly, Amber. What do you think about what I said about the rarity and the happiness and like this sort of intimate pain of having been a Black girl, spending so much time trying to specialize, like present, like perform, radiance, be special enough to be seen, to be safe, to be heard, to be recognized in your wholeness as a human being? What is that for you to hear me say that?
I mean, that, I feel like that resonates a lot with, so much. I mean, I myself have thought a lot about the idea of specimen in relation to diversity and inclusion initiatives and just sort of like what that, the way that those produce particular people as specimens. And then I would say more demand work than necessarily sort of like people are voluntarily giving their work, but sort of, extract a lot of labor and a lot of emotion and time. So I definitely feel that. I mean, I think for me, what I was going to move toward a little bit is thinking about what the reorientation towards touch does. Because for me, a lot of this violence of rarity is also so linked to the visual and sort of like representational regimes and sort of things like that, where it's so, given all of these violent histories, it's how does one make one seen as a Black person, right? Black woman, where people do not want to see you or do not want to value you. And so one of the strategies can be to shift sensorial modes. And so that for me is one of the things that I find really interesting about this movement towards touch. Although touch, of course, has its own, no sense is neutral, like touch has its own violent history. And I know I've heard certain scholars argue that, one of the marks of enslavement was that it was basically meant that anyone was allowed to then touch you, that you were no longer. So in that way, thinking about what it is for you to be a toucher, I think becomes really also interesting.
Right. It is. It is, to also like, for me, when you like, I'm going to speak really personally and informally right now. I like being raised to be afraid of your body and to be raised in a culture that invites you through, the capitalist world to consume things, to tame your body and to make your body more touchable and more pleasing. It is, and all of, just for me to like recognize all of the ways that I have tried to experience my own wholeness and humanness through the violence of these strategic constructs of to shrink the being and to shrink the humanity. What is really important to me, and through any work that I'm doing, is to return as much as possible to my own human technology. So I'm thinking of touch I am not stopping in the realm of the violent. I am not stopping in the realm of the construct. I'm going to go through that place and going to work to follow threads of truth to the clearest place of human technology that I can find. So when I'm engaging in touch with human beings or with objects in so many different ways, one of the things I'm doing is reauthorizing and fueling the engine of my most original human technology. So one of the things I'm thinking about, and one of the things I'm, through like consider, inside of that space of original human technology, I'm also thinking about like shamanistic touch. And engaging with that like original place of humaning, which is in shamanistic touch.
Yeah, that's it, because I was going to ask about the, I don't know if we want to, well, maybe not. I was going to say if we want to play the video of the touching, but one of the things that I feel like could happen with sort of the touching of all the objects is exhaustion, right? And so sort of thinking, I'm curious how this idea of shamanistic touch kind of,
okay. Yes.
I don't want to say like prevents that, but like maybe, you know what I mean? Like it feels as it's indicating a different orientation to the objects.
It is absolutely, because you're in relationship with the object. You are not just placing touch upon the object. You are not just what you acknowledge is the invisible world, the invisible world of the object, like all the things that you don't know, but you're also touching with great respect to the simultaneity of time, right? And so that means all the touch is a circle. This is not like taking touch. This is not, so one of the things that happened, and when we show the touching video, one of the things that happened is I'm not just touching, I'm counting. At the same time, I'm counting out loud. The counting is being recording, and I have a clicker in my hand. So we're keeping track. We're keeping track in video, we're keeping track audio, and we have a physical counter, and we photograph the counter at the end of each section. We write down that number. And so what happened was, I thought that my task was to count everything as quickly as possible, which is exhausting. It is exhausting because the orientation, as you said, is towards, it is actually about the task. It is, the orientation is also, the way that I am in the world in relationship with other people. I'm thinking about how can I do this fast enough so that I don't exhaust the curator, so that I don't exhaust the videographer, so that we're not in here. How can I take care of everybody else and do this as quickly as possible? And what happened is that, in this moment of awakening, I had to stop and reorient myself in relationship. And that's where we come to an understanding that, everything that I'm touching is also touching me. And there is a circle, and there is more information in that touch than there is capacity to give language for what's happening in that moment. And so one of the things we recognize in colonization is just the like militaristic separation of, in the specimenizing, but also separation from self, separation from, like in my tradition, from honoring the invisible. Like there's more information in things that we cannot see, that we are actively influenced by. And so it became a circle through the process, and it was exhausting when it was this linear relationship. And it was mean. and that I did not actively, consciously of intellectual process stop working that way. I was stopped in the touch. I was stopped. I had to, and I was embarrassed. In this sort of orientation where I had stepped into the place of the person who, like that I continued a relationship of violence with these objects. Like I stepped into the role of a continuation, a person who is continuing the violence of this. And that I was prevented from moving forward in that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're gonna watch the clip, and then I have more to say, but I totally get it.
Thank you.
50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, okay, 37, 38, did I do this? 39, 40, 41, 42, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 52.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because I feel like the word that people often use for, people will say like animism, right? Which I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I have feelings about that as a word, but I think one of the things that perspective makes me think about the assemblages in the show in a different way, right? Where to me, the difference between seeing those objects that you're counting, like they're all, they're not touching each other at that point, right? And they're like isolated. And so when you suddenly like amass them and put them together, and in cases with like objects from, if people are giving these objects to you, right, like they're already imbued with these histories and these, these other kinds of forces from where they came from. And it just sort of, it made me think a lot about care and sort of touch, and sort of that like the objects touch each other is like, maybe you're protecting the objects in a particular sort of way.
Did you say protecting?
Yeah.
The objects in the Skinner or the objects given?
The objects given, because I mean, I'm assuming these are not objects from the Skinner.
The objects that you see in front of you are from the Skinner.
They are, okay.
Yeah, that's Skinner collection shells. And so continue on.
No, I mean, I was just interested in like the difference between like the kind of like the glass encased, rationalized presentation of the objects versus the sort of, I mean, I don't know, just for me, it felt like that spirit of like, whatever you are touching is also touching you.
Absolutely.
Is sort of continuing to work also in the assemblages.
Well, yeah. Let me tell you what it was like to get the objects that people sent in. One, it was incredibly intimate because, I'm opening up these protected bags. They shipped things to me and made sure that things couldn't get wet if something happened. So these protected bags, like everything had been protected by the museum staff to get it to me, even the note cards. And so there was what I will say, and I feel like I need to say this for however who hears it finds a place of truth and understanding. Everything that I did intentionally with as much love as I could. So it's important for me to say this because we keep talking about the rarest Black woman on the planet Earth in the show as a project. And it has a definitive start and stop and have process. But what's important to hold this in is that I understand in anything that I'm doing in my life that it is about my wholeness, and I have the opportunity to engage in every interaction, in every relationship. I have the opportunity to engage and activate as much of my humanity as possible. And activating through wholeness is radical and revolutionary and transformative and activates secret work. So one of the things I will say is I touched everything with a great amount of love because I recognize that it came from a human being who made an intentional decision to offer it forward. So I'm opening up these bags, and some of the first thing I pulled out are these really small bras, these like A cup white bras, and they were identical. And it reminded me of like the bras that your mother gets you, that is like, this is a bra that's acceptable to wear your senior year of high school or something. And I'm pulling out these bras. And so I made sure, because one of the things that I do as an act of decolonizing my own heart is to move with care. And to move with as much care as possible in all the ingredients of my existence, because it's not too long ago in the lineage of my family where, like you said, anybody some people could touch you, but you also didn't belong to yourself, And so anything that I can do to engage in softness, engage in tenderness, and to engage in care for me is, to be honestly, some of the most profound political acts that I can do, because it is returning myself to myself. So I'm engaging in the ritual, ceremony. They say the definition of ceremony is to remember, remembering to remember. And so it gives me, I had the opportunity to give myself slowness and touch of every object that people gave me. And then I'm reading the cards, and I realized I was like, oh, people are in a lot of pain, and it's a lot of secret pain. I can't tell you how many cards I got that said, I never told anybody this. And they were a lot about things that happened to people's bodies, And so one of the things that happened to me in touching the objects in the Skinner was I could not touch them transactionally. I had to touch them in relationship, which meant that I'm touching and being touched, and there's information being shared, which meant that the touching actually became a profound act of listening. And so that profound act of listening, I was guided by those objects in the Skinner to listen to the objects that the students in the community of Mount Holyoke gave me, with with an expansiveness, right? All of which is incredibly difficult in a world that discounts that kind of tenderness and that kind of listening, and actually has produced an incredible amount of violence against it, right? And so the process of touching the clothing, the bras, the pieces of jewelry, the shoes that were worn in different ways, or the shoes that didn't seem like they were worn at all, and to engage through imagination and through heart, but also with one of the prime ingredients being the intention of connection. thinking about how much, how much rupture and severing is continued, is in like white supremacist violence that we live in actively every day. So the touching became listening, became a profoundly muscular capacity to reach through the medium of the heart into the work in a way that that was like really new and was like difficult, but I was able to engage very soulfully with the objects that were given from the Mount Holyoke community, because a lot of them I literally used as the soul of the work. So I used them as like the inside of the work. Like people's clothing, I would bind so tightly and make these forms out of, as though it was like the tendon, the muscle, the bones. And then some of the work is wrapped. People's cards, like some of the most intimate things that people said, I put them on the inside of these bindings, of these wrappings, of these swaddlings. So, there's some things that people will never see, but that work is still communicating. It is still active. And one of the things I want to say is, for any artist who is on this call right now, always giving full permission and capacity and agency for you to develop your own process, your own ways, reasons, method, and understanding of the actual technology that you are as an artist. So always giving permission to that sort of quivering place of fear that is leading you to newness. So I just want to affirm that for any artist who is on this call right now. It is, so that's what I will say. I feel like I went to all these different places. The touch changed for me. I think one of the most important things I said is that the touch became listening.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me curious. I know we have a little bit of a slideshow of your recent show at Casman, Sad Rapper. And I'm curious, I mean, I think one of the continuities that I would identify, at least like on the outside, is a lot of the techniques of assemblage appear to be similar, but obviously the process, as I'm understanding it, is different, right? So I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit about, I guess, I don't want to assume that you're not working in collaboration with, given that you have 75 pounds of old blue jeans for this one, right? That
Right.
Obviously there's still personal history is wrapped up in these objects as well. But I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, about, I guess, that difference maybe.
So there's a pretty big difference because I had decided when I get all the boxes of Mount Holyoke things that it's the most honorable way for me to engage with that material is to use every single thing that was given to me. And that is not the way that I work in my studio practice. I am like, when I'm doing all the work for Sad Rapper is coming through a different vein of, of the sort of like meaty practice of being an artist in the world. Like, I'm a citizen artist for a reason. So I am alive, engaging in all of the complexities and turmoils and poppy like inclusions and incursions of this world through my work, right? And Mount Holyoke show, the sort of intimacy of it was wild. It was wild because I had to make Mount Holyoke and Sad Rapper at the same time. But this Mount Holyoke show was pushed back because of COVID, and it was wild. Sometimes I would work for 2 days on Mount Holyoke, and it was like I had the top half of my body was different to make Mount Holyoke work. And then I would transition into back the Sad Rapper work And some of it, you know what, Amber, nobody's asked me that question before, so I haven't been able to give language to it. But what I will say is shit was hard. It was hard. And it was, I felt, you know what, I felt like a sense of responsibility to a whole bunch of people who weren't in the room with that Mount Holyoke show. I felt like when I started to see the things that people wrote to me, and sometimes people wrote me, they said, Vanessa, this is such and such and so and so. And I was like, or, I mean, some of the things that people wrote me, I was like, it was heavier in a different way. And there was a sense like this piece, TV Man, you know, this is, so one of the things I will say inside of my practice of assemblage is the most free that I feel as a human being. Amber, I need to ask you, where's the most free that you feel? Where do you experience living the most freedom in your life?
Well, I love to write. I love to write. So when I'm writing my sentences, I feel
Absolutely.
I love it.
I can feel it in your face. Like when you said it, I can feel it. Right. And so I have that experience in the making. So I can look at TV Man and I can feel falling away from me the sort of scales of things. And I can feel myself entering into the sort of like ocean of possibility. And, you know, there's a place and a way in there that is where I experience actively making my own future, right? And so, but also in TV Man, this sculpture specifically, part of it came from a vision of a thing, you know? And to be a self-taught artist in a world where, you know, earlier in my life, there were Black academics and Black critics who paid attention to me. And I've talked about this before, it's not news, but they would always warn me about saying that I saw something in a vision or that I did it because I loved it or it felt this way. And they were like, yo, people don't actually know what that means. So you're gonna have to be careful. And I was also often cautioned about that. So one of the things that I experienced so powerfully is moving from vision into like three-dimensional object, but also being really rigorous in my curiosity about the vision and the nature of the vision and what it means, and talking to other people about, you know, what they've seen, felt, heard, or what they know, what they have in their knowing center about, you know, a TV wrapped with 50, it's 50 feet. It is a full 50 feet cut and dry of cord, of rope that is around that TV. And so one of the questions I asked is like, how much length of rope does it take to make a noose that could bear the weight of a human body, you know, and to lynch somebody? How much is that? What's the shortest amount? Like when it's strong, what is it? So like I'm asking questions of the object, you know, through whatever, like different kinds of connections that come to me. But it's also like the work is doing, so one of the things I say is more than one thing is happening at the same time, all the time.
Yeah.
But, you know, Sad Rapper, the show, I'm able, like authorization for each object came from a completely different place than the Mount Holyoke show.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that makes sense. It's interesting in I mean, you can feel it even in just like looking at the captions too, right? It's sort of like
Although the material lists.
Oh, the material, sorry, yes.
Yeah, so one of the material, the ingredients of the three-headed man is Will Smith crying at the Oscars and saying that he didn't know why he was crying the way that he was crying, but it was clear to me that he was crying because all of the everything rising up inside of his physical body, and no one was really there to help him through the emotional and spiritual tsunami that was calling his name into his own self. That was like watching a miracle unfurl itself in the midst of rush hour traffic on the 405. It's a big thing. It's an ingredient. is part of the invisible material. So what I also, in recognizing how dangerous it has been for Black women, Black queer folks to engage in their wholeness on this land, any opportunity I get, I want to make space for more wholeness. And so one of the ingredients of the three-headed man is intentional space making. So what I could say is there is space inside of the site of this work. And that could be shorthand for Will Smith crying at the Oscars,
No, it's interesting. It's like, I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's such a specific mode of, I don't even want to say it denotes, but it's like, it's expressing the complexity of emotion, right? And like that sort of that wholeness, that it's sort of like, there's a lot of, but it's interesting to have objects, I would say, like denote emotion rather than necessarily hold emotion in the way that they are in the Mount Holyoke collaboration.
Well, because emotion is an experience, right? And so how do we invite or engage in the most intimate places of experience, like as artists? What one, so one, just in your human body, your nervous system, it can't not happen. But how do you, is there a space of bravery as an artist in inviting or engaging in the intimacy of the experience of emotion, or just like even acknowledging that it's happening when you're looking at art? Because like you might look at art totally different than Amber, who lives up for me, right? And we want to fully be able to value and make space for all of those experiences, recognizing that there has been intentional exclusivity around the seeing and talking about and the knowing about art. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, like.
How do you feel right now? How do you feel?
I mean, I just feel like we've gone so deep. Now I'm like, I don't know how to ask another question.
What if you don't ask a question? What if you tell me how you feel? Is that okay? Because like you're because I'm like fascinated by like I love listening to you say, like trying to figure out how to say, like, does it denote, does it this, like, how do you translate an artist like me into the language of your world and these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because what I thought I would be asking you more about like Nkisi figures, right? And sort of like those types of genealogies. But instead, I'm feeling like I'm still stuck on thinking about, temporality and process and listening, which I don't know how to.
How do you, okay, I have a question for you about listening, but continue what you're saying, because I'm really working on being an adult who doesn't interrupt people.
You can, I mean, I don't mind. No, and just sort of, I'm just trying to, it's making me approach the art in a particular way, because then I'm trying to sort of look for spaces within me that might be stirring up, that I might have not paid attention to. Like I'm trying to sort of think about you listening and listen to myself listening at the same time.
Oh, say it again, Amber.
So
I'm going to find that one in the transcript and separate it so I can read that, what you just said.
No, but I think I think especially with emotions on the materials list, right? It's sort of, you necessarily end up with these spirals of like interrogation and reflexivity, so I'm sort of like, is that you know, if this is about that feeling of Will Smith crying at the Oscars, then what is my response to, you know what I mean? Like, how am I seeing that there? Or what is my feeling about that, you know?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to say is my teachers taught me that listening is active loving. Because it can be, you know, in being retrained to be actively loving in a difficult world, like, so, because capitalism encourages you to love objects and to love material, things that you can buy. So my teachers taught me that listening is an act of love. And bell hooks taught me that love always makes more of itself. And that is always becoming itself at the same time. And it is also always becoming you. So that interrogation, like, because one of the things you said is, am I supposed to see it this way? If I see like Will Smith is here. And so what we would say is our conversation and any curiosity that you have, and the spiral of curiosity is a ritual into yourself, right? And that's important. And that all of this is the work. What's happening is the thing itself. And we value that from every perspective, which we recognize also is a crack, and it is actually a brutality to the lie of white supremacy. Which means all of this is us engaging in emancipatory process, and any spiraling of questions is into the deep emancipation of your being, our being. So, like, do we give ourselves permission? Do we give ourselves permission to stand in as many places of perspective and engage with the work? Or are we valuing standing in only 2 places of perspective to engage? Are we devaluing? What are we doing in our curiosity? And are we separating ourselves? You know, and where's the benefit to separating ourselves? And, you know, so I find it like, what do you want to say right now, Amber?
I don't know. I'm just thinking about how all of this process, I mean, also in relation to liberation, how it also makes time, right? Because it creates this sort of, this invitation to proceed more slowly.
I feel that so strongly right now. I feel that, like, that's what I was thinking, like, it's inviting us to slow down.
Yeah, to sort of, but it's an interesting slowness, because it's also, to me, feels like it's both a rejection of productivity in that kind of like, okay, I did this, now we can move on. But it's also, I feel like it's letting at least me feel the weight of so many accumulated times all at once too.
Right, exactly. That's what one of the things I said earlier was, to hold respect to the simultaneity of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like how complicated it can be to be with those layers, but the slowness then being required, or being in the invitation of slowness into that, and slowness as an antidote. Mm-hmm. So to how forceful it can feel to be engaging in your productivity as a human being, as like one of your primary engagements with your physical body, your intellectual prowess and stuff is through productivity. And so an antidote to that, sometimes I think about the work in my secret language inside of myself as like these rituals to slowness, through curiosity, through like the aesthetic appeal to memory. Because so many objects you look at there, you're like, oh, I remember this, you know, on Man and his inner child, like people remembering Diane Carroll and Julia, you know, in the, so I want to say that my practice is it's really spiritual, and I often don't feel welcome to really unfurl. We talked about unfurling the inside of the inside of the inside of it, and sometimes it's difficult for me to bring the reality of what it is for me into certain places, because sometimes the shape of the art world or the shape of the academic world doesn't have a place to hold it. Like, I'm really quite aware of how you say sometimes, Amber, you say, I think this and I feel this. Like, I'm really aware of when you tell me you're feeling something and when you tell me you're thinking something, and the language that follows, I think or I feel. And I find that place between thinking and feeling and how we talk about value as really a place of awakening, and it humbles me in my heart. How do you feel right now?
I was just going to say I'm thinking, but I feel like that's the wrong answer.
No, there's no like, what it is an opportunity to either stumble through it and figure out, or you can say you don't know. But it is not either or, and there's no prize. So I just really wanted to know like where you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I am thinking just and I feel like this is generally how, whenever I'm thinking about art, I'm interested in this kind of question, but just around how many layers of invisible intention there are, even in a visual object, right? And just sort of how to get at all of those, those things, like the feeling, spirituality.
I really appreciate you saying that, like how many layers there are. Yeah. But I also really want to say, I feel like, do you feel rare?
Yes, I feel very rare.
I feel like you're rare too. I feel like you're rare. And I also experience your writing and just you as a human thinker as such a gift. Like the way you think and how you write, I feel like it's a true gift, to the world. Because I recognize that you are so rare. There's a way that your mind works, and that when you apply your focus to a subject, what you do there, I'm like, oh, this human being is inviting us into these forms of awakening and enlivening and activating our own spaces of thought in these ways. And I feel like that's a true gift. And so I wanted to thank you for that, but also really acknowledge it and recognize it, because we recognize that you are rare, and that you give us an opportunity to experience ourselves and thought and art and in ways that are part of our liberatory process.
Thank you. Thank you. I know, I feel like this, I guess we'll turn it over to questions. But it feels like this, I'm really happy that we've sort of pivoted. I know, as contested as rare is as a category.
Sometimes it's true.
Well, and it also feels like, the invitation is to to find that space of rareness within everybody is rare, right? And just sort of figure out how to access that, you know.
Yeah. And I'm totally in support of it. Like, I'm in support of every individual human being going to the place, you know, like, if they, so one of the things I think about sometimes is that Johns Hopkins study about touch, you know, I love that, but also how, you know, like, if human beings are 99.9% genetically identical, then you find the part of you that is just you and access that. And yeah, so I feel you. And I'm so grateful that you said that.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. I think Chloe, we turn it back to you for.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much to both of you for that amazing conversation. I'm like, I know. I'm gonna, the first question is going to be from Fong Bui, our publisher and artistic director. And Fong should be able to unmute now to ask.
Thank you. Wow. I was in and out, Vanessa and Amber, but I heard so many deep things. One thing I heard was the idea of emotion, you know, feeling emotion. It's a big deal. I remember when I was barely maybe 8 years old, 1973, I think, seeing Enter the Dragon, could you believe it? Bruce Lee, fourth film. And he was teaching a pupil how to do the daily practice. And he recognized the young student was following the lesson without investment of the emotion whatsoever. So he, one point, said to him, emotional content. Very big deal, you know, and it haunted me forever. You know, you can argue all you can about how people emotion can create a motivation either for amazing constructive impulse or the opposite, which is destructive impulse, you know, depending how we look at it, you know. I heard the word vision. Amber would bring a smile to me at the moment, because when you think about it, Thought Form, that great book, Annie Besant and Let Beder, you know, which liberate modern art. Emotion is a big deal, and so is vision. You know, you don't make art out of being just trained academically. That's what modern art is. It provides a new path for individuality, that you can undertake your own form of abstraction, whatever that might be. But vision is so interesting because I remember Forrest Bass, the self-taught artist from Bayside, Texas, who only paint a picture which is the size of his head when he have a dream, a vision. And it's interesting in what you were saying too. What I like to ask you, Vanessa, the idea of assemblage is so particular to you. You know, I have the great privilege as a college student. Somehow I attended to the Live Aid concert in 1985 in Pennsylvania. And believe it or not only I attended to that concert, I managed to hang out with Bo Diddley afterwards. And I asked him, where do you get your name from, sir? He said, from the Diddley Bowl, one of the oldest instruments in West African history. It's very simple. What I'm trying to relate here is when the discovery of early Delta blues, which he and I talked briefly, you know, when the guitar is given to a slave, you know, he or she could not mediate with the European metric, you know, E, A, D, G, A, E, right? They have to tune it in some different way so that it can resonate their own sound from the old country, old culture, its heritage, you know? So that's how the beginning of so-called Delta Blue began, because it all had to do with sliding into a different tune. They had to tune different way so that they can put a bottle and slide back and forth, just like the diddley bow, you know? And I think that is super profoundly visceral, you know? And I can imagine, Amber, that the young Robert Rauschenberg, you know, born in Port Arthur, Texas, would come and study at Black Mountain College in, was it North Carolina? I can imagine he'd go back and forth, driving for out notice in the yards of Black family, where everything is accumulated, potentially a work of art. I think his idea of collage is different than those of European, for example, you know, but he certainly took a great deal from that tradition, vernacular tradition, no more, no less than Bob Dylan or the Rolling Stone taking rock and roll, the birth of rock and roll from blues, right? Okay, that's a longer history. I know I'm sharing so much of that narrative, Vanessa. What is my question? Bring me to ask this question before I go to a meeting. So when you have a vision of a piece, right, Vanessa? Where do you begin? You know, the material, the image.
Thank you for sharing those stories, and you're really lucky to have had that time with Bo Diddley. So sometimes vision works for me in like profoundly different ways. Sometimes I will see a complete vision of a structure that I know when I see it. Sometimes see in my eyes, like I'm outside crossing the street, I'll see a sculpture passing by me and I'll be like, oh, that's something I'm supposed to make. But it comes to me as though I'm experiencing a splicing of time. What I'm actually experiencing is the object existing in the world in a future time, and those moments of time are meeting. So I'm seeing something that exists and it'll happen in a blink, and I take a mental picture of it, and there's certain information that is like seared into me in that way of working when I have a complete vision. There have been times that I have dreamt entire sculptures or the entire first line of a poem. And those poems have been so radically, profoundly healing and guiding in my life that, and I don't know why it happens. And I don't really know where it comes from or where all it's coming through. But what I know is not to ignore it. I know not to diminish it. I know not to act like it's not real. I can receive, I am available to receive through this technology of vision. With the work TV Man, I saw a man without a shirt with a TV wrapped around his body walking up State Street in Western North Carolina, about an hour away from Black Mountain College. I saw this and I knew in a moment what it was and where it was supposed to be. So there's a place of recognizing that I, as an artist, and being an artist is a whole entire thing. It is a whole way to be alive. It is not something that we clock in and clock out of. It is the wholeness of our dimensional identity. And sometimes when I have a vision, it is touching into those places of dimension, which I have full acceptance of in my life. And when I think about the blues specifically, when I think about Ma Rainey talking about, because Ma Rainey called herself the mother of blues, but when she tells the story of where the blues really came from, she said that they were at a camp meeting by a river and a girl got up at this camp meeting and walked up the aisle singing out her soul, singing something up through her that so seized the audience and so quaked them that Ma Rainey knew that what that child was, because it was a child who did this, what the child was doing was making space and making more air for them all, even though what the child was singing talk story.
Mm-hmm.
And it was devastating, the talk story, like what she was actually saying. But Ma Rainey recognized, oh, you have to bring this up and out of your body. And that up and out of the body became like this sort of like jangly rope bridge that everyone who listened could cross into a space of spaciousness in their own heart, because everybody was carrying devastating stories. But the blues, and in that giving, and in the giving of this child's soul, that what was brought forward was a medicine.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't something to alleviate symptoms. It was a medicine in and of itself. So the discussion is, it had to be holy, and it had to be love, and it had to be that. And you know, one of the things I think about are all the artists. Like, I have all these secret conversations with artists because I always want to know about the soul. Is how many times I've talked to artists or writers, and they're like, I don't really know where that idea came from. This thing happened, and it opened up a place, and I followed it, and you know, it didn't start on paper. And I'm really fascinated by those happenings, but I'm also fascinated by how some people do not feel free enough to share.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You know,
thank you. Well, I mean, that was seriously deep, right, Amber? What Vanessa just expressed there. I think that vision and soul is related. The spirit and idea also related too, but the spirit has to be there to protect the soul. The vision need to be protected, but also need to be trusted. So what you're saying is that you surrender yourself to the vision, which is
yes,
amazing.
because I have experienced how incredibly painful it is to have judged the vision, to have anxiety about the thing, to not believe it. Like, it's crushing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't even explain the pain of having like sneered.
Yeah. You know, Vanessa, I suffered that too, because my vision for the rail is love and for it to be free, no judgment. You know, I remember clearly Toni Morrison once said something super profound. She said, if you surrender to the wind, you can ride it. Super important. I mean, we are lucky. We are lucky that the fact that you have your own vision, some of us have our own, and we are lucky because former President Donald J. Trump doesn't have a vision. He's what I call entrepreneur opportunist. So the rest of those people, if he had a vision, we're in deep trouble. So the fact that we have a vision, and our vision also include the amplification, super strong presence of love, is powerful. So that's more power to you, sister. I mean, I'm going to a boring meeting right now. Oh, don't say that, Phil. Okay, a productive meeting. But please go see the show, everyone. Amber, lovely to see you. Can't wait to meet you in person, Vanessa. And back to you, Captain Staggerman. Bye, you guys.
Thank you, Fong. Thank you so much for that generous response, Vanessa. We do have another question from my colleague, Eleanor. Eleanor, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chloe. And thank you so much, Amber and Vanessa. This conversation has been incredibly moving. And I'm really honored to have been able to listen. I kind of wanted to ask you, Vanessa, I know something I guess I've been thinking about recently is like having all the different stages of life like inside of you at every age that you're at. So I was wondering what you might say to your young artist self, your child artist, speaking from where you are now and like from, I guess also from your younger self, if that makes sense.
Okay, so honoring the simultaneity of time, as you said. Sometimes people ask me on my birthday how old you are, and I say all of them. So what's really fascinating is like I'm in Los Angeles right now, where I grew up. And I grew up in LA, and I remember moments of meeting my own eyes in the mirror and seeing an older version of my own eyes at the same time, like almost superimposed, and having, like, I remember the first time it happened, I was like, oh my God, like what just happened? You know, like I see myself seeing myself. And so one of the things we could say is like, I am aware of being aware or something. But one of the things that I will say is I experienced sort of these rhyming moments of time where I recognized that I was actually speaking to my younger self, that it was me saying, and sometimes, you know, like I've heard different versions of this question, right? And people say, oh, I would tell my younger self, you know, don't go to dental school, you know, be a dancer, whatever, you know. But one of the things that I found that I was always telling myself through time was to hold on and to keep going. And one of the rhyming moments I had through time of myself in my 30s, speaking to a version of myself in my late teens, was that you feel like you have been isolated, but you have not been isolated, you have been protected. And then that made me sort of zoom out and look at all of the things that protected and kept me in my own body even. And so one of the things I want to say is like, or ask is, where have you recognized that you have been in constant communication with yourself throughout time? And has it been in dream? Has it been that you have sent yourself certain songs or pieces of music? Has it been that you've sent yourself a book that you're on the bus and you sit down in a seat and somebody left a book there or something? Like, where is it that you have found yourself seeing yourself and knowing yourself throughout time, right? Because that is an experience that we have access to as human beings, which is why it is such a catastrophe to separate people structurally and strategically from the power of their own heart. In so many different ways. And that's why, so I asked that question of everybody who's still on this call, is like, where have you met yourself throughout time? Where do you recognize you've been there for yourself, that it was actually you that gave you the inspiration, that it was you that invited you into a certain room that began a conversation or relationship? Like, can you honor that you have met yourself many times and that you love yourself so deeply and so thoroughly that you have placed a kind of trail magic throughout your entire life? Like, trail magic is on the Appalachian Trail. People leave like little notes and messages throughout the hundreds of miles, like to help each other keep going. Where do you recognize you have done that for yourself? Right? So thank you for that question, Eleanor.
Thank you for that really illuminating, beautiful response. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. This has just been an amazing conversation. So grateful to be here with all of you today. That's all for our questions today. But at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Yaz Lancaster, to the NSE. Yaz Lancaster is a Black transdisciplinary artist. They are most interested in practices aligned with relational aesthetics and the everyday, fragments and collage and liberatory politics. Yaz performs as a violinist, vocalist, and steel panist, and their work is presented in many mediums and collaborative projects. It often reckons with specific influences ranging from politics of liberation and identity to natural phenomena and poetics. Their ongoing independent studies navigates prison industrial complex abolition, Marxist theory, and internet social media cultures. Their writing appears in various publications, including I Care If You Listen, Afternoon Visitor, The Tiny, and Underblock where poem Ratios was awarded the 2021 Blanc Prize, as well as a Pushcart nomination. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Yaz.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thankful that Brooklyn Rail has invited me to this space. And thank you so much, Amber and Vanessa, for this conversation. It was really insightful and just a lovely way to spend a Friday afternoon. So this first poem was written a couple of years ago when I was thinking a lot about family and about memory and nostalgia. And it's called Every Day the Earth Shrinks, or maybe that's called Growing. Before we were big, we wanted to be pioneers. There was a time when we were made from some mud, packs of crayons, a little hydrogen peroxide, and hot cedar wood. Summers were for the brown apartment with the little window, fire escape creaking, the one real green park that seemed to sprout out of nowhere in the middle of the city, and listening to Biggie, lounging at the barbecues, hanging on the avenues, collecting names like Samara fruit, Timble, and sweet gum, collecting names like lightning bugs in small jars. I'm afraid we're running out of all the terra incognita. Sometimes the sun shows up only to droop our eyelids, and I don't know why I thought light would remain pure when it's so infinite. There are things like holding a shovel or tasting a plum I still haven't done yet. So these next two were published in We've Been Here, which is a chaplet of 6 Black trans poets that was curated by Golden, who's an amazing poet and photographer and writer and thinker, for the Belladonna Collective earlier this year. One up. Every day is like a video game where I start with full health and change my little outfits. I give myself a badge for vacuuming, level up from sending a single email, walking the dog takes a critical hit. TikTok can either heal or rot my brain. It's a miracle I don't quit my job. Final boss battle, doing the dishes with a headache from medication I was prescribed precisely 3 seconds after telling my doctor I'm anxious. Now everything is an allocation of energy. There's no real strategy. I'm just mashing all the buttons. Prime. After much deliberation, I've decided Succession is enjoyable to watch. It's better when bad things happen to rich people. Stealing from Target is getting a little old, so perhaps it's time to up the stakes. Whole Foods. People will say, this is life under communism, and it'll just be a photo of rural Ohio. How are you calling me about my car's extended warranty when I don't own a car? I don't understand why we all pay so much just to live. So I'll do 2 more. This next one is a really new poem. It's something I've been writing and working on for the past couple of days. And it's about dreams. And right now the title is just Dreams, but that's definitely a work in progress. And yeah, it's sort of like a collage of some different media I've been thinking about lately. So Fleetwood Mac, and there's an anime that I'm currently watching that stole a couple of lines from that made its way in here. So this is Dreams. I'm happy to announce I'm taking another Benadryl, prescribed off-label, to see the Hat Man. I hate manifesting capitalistic endeavors, but I'm doing it right now. In the stillness of remembering what you had lost, I'm tilting the head a little dog up to the sky so she can see the sun climbing into a bed of clouds. If I weren't a selfish person, I'd heaven her there instead of burying her in me. Moms and dogs should live forever. Feeding her chocolate and raisins in the sun, I'd kiss her wet nose and barter something grand. I'll give you my heart, and in return, I want you to show me your dreams. And so this last poem was published in The Tiny last year. And And I'd written the first version of it in a workshop with Terrence Hayes when I was still a student. And it's probably my most revised and reworked poem. I think I settled on this current version maybe 3 or 3.5 years after I started writing it. And it's called Ojalá. Nobody ever tells you these things, like how small and weird you'll feel before massive paintings, the way you do when you're young and a man is screaming. Someday you can grow up and stop being a girl or be depressed by sunlight and just enough quicksand, apples in the trash, once bitten and tossed. Inevitably, on the way to seeing my mother, I wish I held prayer the way in which one carries religion, a reason to bend toward earth, knees first, to wash my body from the inside, or anything to believe in that doesn't make mistakes. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Yaz. That was really, really incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Amber. We'd also, of course, like to thank Molly Taylor and Marjorie Newman and Laura Shea and the team at Casman, who helped us so much in preparation for this conversation. And we'd like to thank the Terra Foundation, who sponsor this program and make daily conversations like this one possible and support our growing archive. For 22 years, the Rail has provided a platform for arts, culture, and politics in our monthly publication and in public events like today's. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the writers, editors, and operations at the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., you can join us for a conversation with a group of the Rail's November Critics Page contributors, hosted by guest critic Emmanuel Aduma, called Balance of Stories. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Meg Sun-yoon. And as is Rail tradition, we'd like to thank you so much for coming, and you can now unmute yourselves and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Vanessa and Amber and Yaz. This has been so great.
Yes, thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Give Vanessa! Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Yaz. That's incredibly beautiful. Much support, love, soul, and muscle to you in your writing and your art and your life. Thank you, Camille. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Diane.